Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Welcome to another edition of Fake Accents Unite. Cheers and applause across the stadium. I'm joined, of course, by my long-suffering co-host, the Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening from the mountain of tranquility and insight.
I was going to say, how was your...
Given that you earlier announced me on Twitter as, what is it, the Britisher who will be telling us about his spiritual journey.
I just said you'd been away on a spiritual journey, off to the swollen... that's not a good word. To the rolling hills of South America to go on your dream journey.
I learned to play the panpipes while I was there.
Yeah, smoked a lot of peyote and also did an ayahuasca ceremony or something.
I went on the search for the lost ladies netball team of Peru. Yes. No. Moving on.
And that's where I said.
It didn't take as long, did it?
No, it never does, really. Good evening to everyone in the chat. Who am I going to blame this week for being late? I'm going to blame you, Mork S. I see you there. You're the reason we're late. You're always the reason. Hello to all the regulars as well. I see Colin P. Smith.
I can confirm that Morg S chap is the one who always delays everything.
100%. I can see Mirror J. I can see Tom of Loxley. I can see the Right Honourable Fez, that crime guy, Poe the Person, Anakin Crinchwalker. There's lots of you in there. It's lovely to see you all. But obviously, this is our first week back now, Britisher, for you, it's been 4 weeks off from the show. How have you coped?
Well, withdrawal symptoms isn't the terminology that one could possibly use for this. It was interesting because obviously first you decided to move to somewhere in the third world that had no internet access.
London, yes.
As I said, third world. And then I just basically took it as read that until I would hear from you, we would be off air. So, not having heard, I just thought, we won't be doing anything. And then, what was it, something like 7:30 or something like that? I think you sent me a tweet last week saying, are you all right? And it took me until about 8:20 until I saw that tweet. And I went, no, I'm sorry, I can't make it. I didn't realise we would be on tonight.
Yeah, in hindsight, a little bit more notice would probably have been ideal. Although I will blame it, of course, on the fact that your boot-up sequence is from the late 1980s and therefore is incredibly slow, and so it took a week to online you again.
I remember computers where you pretty much... The entire operating system within the computer consisted of read disk that gets entered. So the entire system, the entire operating system needed to be loaded by putting a floppy disk in a computer.
Oh, yeah.
I remember those times.
Oh, yeah.
So, I'm not going to have the young'uns lecture me on computing.
What was it, like 8 kilobytes or something like that? Something to that effect. It's 32.
It was ridiculous. Some of the things that you look back on now and you just wonder, how on earth did those machines work?
With a lot of tape and a lot of flashing lights, typically.
I think it just basically we were a lot more patient.
Well, you had to be.
Now, basically, you do something and you just expect it. Come on. I want the result. Give it me now. Whereas...
I'm pretty sure some men, in particular, had a similar sensation when they were searching things on the internet of, come on, load quicker, and that sort of thing. When it came to certain imagery as well, and that sort of thing. No doubt.
Oh, no doubt. I have absolutely no idea of what you speak, of course.
Of course.
No,
netball teams, for sure.
I mean, I remember that sort of strange ratcheting noise that disk drives made. I mean, for any old fogies like myself out there. Or, also another one was, of course, dial-up internet.
That noise still haunts my dreams.
So first you get a sort of noise. then you get a strange double bounce.
Must
Ding, ding.
Must
and
be
then
something
it goes
wrong with
into
the modem.
Then it goes into a fax sound. And yes, anybody who remembers that, yes, please let us know in the chat.
What's funny is it's a strangely comforting noise, despite it being I mean, for me anyway, it was a strangely comforting noise because it meant at least the thing was trying to do something.
Yes, there was that. There was a certain reassurance that if you got that noise, you at least knew something was happening. This was because everything was so much slower. I mean, now with 5G networks and whatever coming, if the systems get fast enough, we may end up in the situation where by the time we've pressed the button, the answer is already returning to us.
I mean, do you not have that already?
Well, it needs to creep through the wires to the other end, and then eventually the thing needs to return. But with 5G being so fast that it is beyond human reaction time, we might have really strange,
I mean,
it may be one of those things where we need to get used to a sort of different feel of technology.
I mean, I don't know how much of an adjustment that's quite going to be, but I mean, this stuff has been around a little bit longer than you might expect as well, just not necessarily available to the public. But I mean, commercial internet and things like that have been very good. I used to have a friend who hooked me up into the military's up-down fibre, and it was 250 megabit up and down, just all the time, rapid. I mean, even here and now, I mean, I don't have that here in London, but it was just insane. I mean, you click on the button, it's instantly there. It's just information at your fingertips, as it were. But I do remember, yes, I have two anecdotes, actually. My father, the other day, because I was complaining about the internet at my previous place, which was 1 megabit down and 1/4 megabit up, which is why we were unable to bring you Fake Accents Unite for a little while. He was going off at me about, we used to work off this, that, and the other, and I'm going, the world is different now, Dad. The world it does actually require a little bit more computing power in order to power things up, and especially if you want to broadcast to people.
What is so remarkable is, I remember some of those games from long, long ago that now you look at and they just seem a pixelated mess.
Oh yes, and we give you a headache. I had
but back then they really were the thing.
Oh,
and
yes.
I just wonder in that regard, if you now leap forward a similar amount of time, so much so that, the people then looking back at this stuff, and I think you won't have to go forward as much given the way things are accelerating.
Mm-hmm.
I think when, people who now have absolute fits of joy over some computer game that's just come out or whatever, in 10, 15 years' time, they will look back at that and they will be wondering, what on earth possessed me?
Well, I'll be curious to know. There will be, I mean, at the moment, right, if you take games, for instance, I used to have a flight simulator, a stealth fighter flight simulator, and it was all, I mean, it wasn't exactly 3D. It was like a 2D cockpit made out of red, purple, and yellow lines. And then you had this kind of, it was very hard to see, and it came on 12 floppy disks. 12.
Of course it did, yes.
12, and you just had this box, which was about the size of, a large puzzle box, because it had to be, with these 12 disks inside. You had to preload 4 of them, and then the other ones contained whatever map or mission it was that you were going to go on. And you never got to see the outside of the plane, nothing like that. It was just instantly load, and you were instantly in the air as well. There was no takeoff or landing. And then it was just doing whatever you were going to do. But I remember going from that, and now, of course, you can get that on mobile games. Like as in, you can get higher fidelity and decently graphic little mini flight sims on mobile games. especially interesting thing is at the moment gaming is in a kind of uncanny valley where we're kind of the graphics are kind of regressing. People are big into indie games because they're cheap to produce and they're faster to produce. But in the 3D realm, we've seen a big push from third person to first person, and also this idea of the uncanny valley. How realistic do we want people to look? Because for a long time, the big push was trying to make everything as realistic as possible, and now it's kind of going back to more colourful graphics because they've realised they've reached that uncanny valley where they look pretty good, but there's something really off about them and it makes them really creepy. You can tell it especially when people are eating, for instance. Not that I expect you've played a video game in many years, but
no, I can honestly say that the I can't actually remember when I played a video game last. I mean, I wouldn't say that something like Civilization 6 is a video game. I mean, it's it's a sort of computer strategy game, but it's not. You know, you're not shooting at anything. You're not walking through rooms or anything, or flight simulators or something like that.
You're saying just because you don't play as a person.
Actually, coming to think of it, I'm just trying to remember what it was called. I think the last video game I would say I played was a sort of First World War flight simulator. You know, Sopwith Camels and stuff like that.
Key to the Snoopy mythos, the old Sopwith Camel. Sorry, just that's the main thing I actually remember it from. You know, a mixture.
Well, yes, he always liked to sit on his little doghouse, didn't he, and
yes,
pretend to be hunting the Red Baron.
Yes,
if I remember rightly, he never got him.
No, he never does, and of course, is it what's the little bird? The little bird from that one as well, from Snoopy cartoons.
Woodstock, wasn't it?
Woodstock, who occasionally turns up wearing a little miniature flying cap as well, you know, and sits behind him whilst he's on his little adventures. On top of that, I need to go back and read Snoopy. It's like it was one of those.
I'm actually subscribed to Peanuts on Twitter. I think they've recently started out, and just once in a while they put a little cartoon up. And I find them charming. I really think that there hasn't been much since that. It's humorous, but at the same time, at times it doesn't do things for humour's sake. It just does things just to be quaint.
Yeah, and interesting.
It is charming. It has something. It has a quality about it that very few other cartoons reach.
It's also got that kind of longevity. I mean, as far as I am aware, it never really comments on current events, right?
No.
So it's timeless in that way. Even if you in order to get some of the references, you need to actually know a little bit of history. But the Snoopy is one of those things which, along with Calvin and Hobbes, Garfield, and old runs of the Beano, I remember characterising my early childhood, at least.
I mean, I loved Garfield. I thought he really was something. I couldn't understand how they could so miss the entire character of Garfield in those Bill Murray movies.
Oh yes,
they made some, and you just think, I'm sorry, but did they ever read this thing?
I remember, as someone who was a relative dilettante of Garfield as a child, I remember going to see those films and coming away and going, was that a Garfield film? Like, sort of, just didn't seem to, I mean, the names were the same, but it didn't seem to capture the spirit.
It didn't at all chime with the actual character. It's almost as if they sort of said, oh, no, we have to make him nice and likeable.
I mean, he also plays Bill. It's like the cat is Bill Murray, right? Which is not a kind of softened Bill Murray without the one necessarily the deadpan one-liners, but it was just a very strange. They made a second one, you know, where he goes to Carlisle.
I believe they did. Yes,
I bet you've seen it as well.
To be honest, I wouldn't even remember whether I'd seen it. They were that memorable. I couldn't tell you anything that happened in those films.
I don't know. I don't know what happened in the first one. Something about him getting lost. and I believe in the second film, and I don't know why I can remember these sorts of things, but he goes to Carlisle and ends up swapping places with an identical version of himself who just is British. That's like, I don't know.
Okay. No, this does. The second definitely doesn't ring a bell. I think, doesn't he in the first one? Doesn't he somehow get lost in the city for some reason? He leaves the drive or whatever, which is the only place he knows. But as I say, this is we're really picking over very
we also
here.
We do also need to get away from Garfield as quickly as possible. Otherwise, the meme artists in my Discord will be onto it, because Garfield is a bit of a meme there and not for any wholesome reasons. So I just realised
I am glad to be that innocent and naive that I have no idea what you're talking about.
You say innocent and naive, and I hear technophobic and scared of Discord.
By all means, think that.
Yeah, so over the course, I assume you've enjoyed your time off from the spotlight with fake accents.
Oh, I mean, it was just basically like the ball and chain being unlocked for 7 weeks. How can I put it?
I mean, it's funny. That's exactly how I felt, British. It's exactly how I felt. I mean, in terms of the actual lore of Fake Accents Unite, what actually happened, of course, is you had to move with me, seeing as you sit on my shelf. So we had to.
Yes.
I had to.
This is your law. I would have.
This is our law. This is as much a part of.
There is no such thing as our law.
This is our law.
Established that a long time ago.
Come on, we've been married for long enough that this. I mean, what?
Oh dear God! You're turning into Dave Rubin now, are you?
Rubbish. But the. But of course, the awful truth.
I don't know. I'm your Brazilian other half. Ramon.
Ramon Giorgio, I believe, is the appropriate naming convention. Which was another meme from another time. But those of you, if you know, you know. But if not, speaking of all the nostalgia and memes from the past and that sort of thing, I will take this moment to shamelessly shill our sponsor for this video, which happens to be the like button. So if you're enjoying the stream, do happen to smash that. We've also got some merch which I'm running for a limited time. If you are a fan of the old golden age, shall we call it, of unpopular opinions with the academic agent Britisher, myself, and people like Bantu Rhino and Base Liz, if you go to the merch store in the description of this video, you will find that there is a 1 week only limited run of the a print for the RPG crew, as it were. In fact, I shall pull it up, and it will be in. Yes, here we are. Let me just pop up this image. Add image. Yes, I want to add an image. No, I want to. Of course, this is going wonderfully so far. I'll just change this out for.
It's just interesting for us to listen to your inner monologue.
My inner monologue is fine. You don't need to. Right. I have to scroll it down a little bit. Apologies, chaps. We're getting there, but it's a slow reveal. Britisher, of course, is none the wiser because he doesn't actually watch the side of the screen. But we should see a pith helmet slowly coming into view. And so on. Here we are. So this, if you've been around the channel for a few years, you'll know that this was the original piece of Unpopular Opinions merch from back in the day. And there we are. Base Liz is still around, but she's very busy. Bantu Rhino went off, sold his company, and now lives a life of luxury somewhere else. And of course, Britisher and I kind of generally departed. I mean, you departed a lot more finally than I did from Unpopular Opinions, and I occasionally drop in, but that's about it. But if you're interested in a shirt with this, all affordably priced, I've tried to do it so that it's affordable for everyone. Nothing over. As far as I'm aware, nothing over £25. But if you want a t-shirt, I think you can get one for usual retail value, so it's like 16 quid or something like that. And it also comes on tumblers and flasks and mugs and that sort of thing, if you're interested in that sort of thing. Anyway, enough of that shilling. But there we go. Right. Have you been working on anything recently that you actually want to shill, Britisher?
Oh, I don't know. It's one of those things. I tend to get lost in these projects where I sort of think, oh, any moment now, and then it takes another week or two. I'm working on something about comedy at the moment, and how it's been somewhat curtailed. Let's put it like that. But we'll sort of see how and when I can actually bring this to a finish, and whether YouTube then actually allows me to upload it.
Well, I'm sure they'll allow you to upload it. Whether or not they do anything with it beyond then is then by the by, isn't it?
We'll see.
But yes.
I think once you get to see it, if you get to see it, you'll know why I have my doubts. But put it like this, a lot of it is about what you would call politically incorrect humour and things like that. Because so many things which we actually associate very closely with particular sort of classic comedy and whatever now could never be done. I mean, the amount of sort of classic comedies, classic British sitcoms that you would think of, in which you can point to several scenes at least where you would think, no, that would never be allowed today. I mean, if anybody thinks that one would allow folks to make faulty towers today, I mean, you're out of your mind. It just wouldn't happen. First off, one wouldn't allow the cast. It's not diverse enough. But aside from that, yes, you will find lots of things within that series that are, beyond the pale.
Manuel would be Sudanese, speak perfect English, and always have a comeback for Mr. Faulty.
Of course, yes. Entirely, he would be the one hitting Faulty. But it's even the most sort of innocent things. If you would try and make Dad's Army today, again, it wouldn't be permitted.
It's also it's this strange thing, especially with Faulty Towers, because I did watch it all again recently. It's just the insufferability of certain characters, which is not allowed. I think there was who was the character Alf Garnett, who
Silly Moo.
Sorry?
Shut up, you silly moo.
Yes, exactly.
Alf Garnett. Yeah.
Alf Garnett, yeah. And it became a fan favourite. There was Spike Milligan, wasn't it, who created Alf Garnett?
I'm not sure whether it was Spike Milligan. Spike Milligan did a lot of things. I mean, he was an absolute sort of anarchic powerhouse. Monty Python pretty much admit that they took what he created and just ran with it. If it wouldn't have been for Spike Milligan, there would never have been a Monty Python.
Just trying to think, who wrote Till Death Do Us Part?
Till Death Us Do Part, yes. But there's, while you look at that, there's lots of other stuff. Sort of Benny Hill. Just imagine trying to do Benny Hill today. Girls whose skirt falls off or something like that, and Benny Hill is after them, and then they're after Benny Hill. We all remember the famous final sequence of a Benny Hill show.
Yes.
Where they're all sort of running in sort of fast forward, and he's pursued by just about everybody: the vicar, the police, the fire brigade, and 14 women who want to kill him. You couldn't do that thing today, but that's only that sort of bawdy side of things. Benny Hill had a much more acerbic side to it, which again would not be permitted. And yeah, it's just sort of terrifying to see what's happened, and first you kind of need to illustrate that this is what's happened, and then it's a matter of, well, at some point we need to basically say, but this is what we like, so stuff it.
Indeed, it's a strange one, isn't it? Chat has roundly come up with the answer for us, which is great. The creator was Johnny Spite, or Spate. I don't know how to pronounce Spieght. But the reason I thought it was Spike Milligan was because he wrote another series which was quickly shunned off air called Curry and Chips. Are you aware of Curry and Chips?
I'm not aware of it, but Spike Milligan did quite a lot of sort of funny things. Didn't he do some Pakistani Daleks once and things like that? So
I don't know about the Daleks, but
he liked to play with the Indian accent and things like
that. Well, Curry and Chips was a sitcom about an Indian immigrant who comes to work in a northern factory. And I can't remember what the factory is creating, but he comes along, and it's Spike Milligan in blackface doing an Indian accent. Yeah.
And this is, I mean, when it comes to blackface, this is one of the things that I find terribly annoying. This entire thing about blackface is so bad, it's terrible. I'm sorry, just look at the amount of stuff that was done way back when, in which, I'm sorry, they just, okay, we need to play a black character, we need to play an Asian character, we need to play... So, okay, just don a bit of shoe polish on your face and let's get on with it. And I just don't think there is anything wrong with that, because if it's not malicious, who cares?
Indeed. It's also this, again, we come back to this idea again and again and again, which is, your job is to be an actor. You literally play pretend for a living. If you can only pretend to be the people you already are, what's the point?
You just reminded me there of there's a famous famous anecdote from the film The Marathon Man. I don't know if you've ever seen this film.
I've never even heard of it.
This is quite a hard, tough-going film. Dustin Hoffman is the Marathon Man, so I think he's training for a marathon, so he's doing a lot of running, and he falls into the hands of a sort of Nazi a runaway. It's some guy who was obviously part of the Nazis. He was some sort of Dr. Mengele chap, but he managed to get away. The problem is, this Nazi believes to know where... he believes that Dustin Hoffman knows where some of the treasure is that he needs to get his hands on.
Right.
And therefore there is a very famous torture scene. And Laurence Olivier plays the Nazi terrifyingly. And Dustin Hoffman plays the tortured innocent who really has no idea what the torture is on about. But Dustin Hoffman, of course, was a method actor. Well, is a method actor.
Yeah, so he doesn't break character.
Yes, so because he was a runner, because he played a runner, he would go running. And one day he arrived on the set, just bathed in sweat, having run God knows how many miles. And Laurence Olivier, who of course, famous actor in his own right, looked at him and said, "What on earth? What have you been?" "Oh well, you see, you don't understand it. This is method acting. I am playing a runner, and therefore, in order to get into the character, I must run." And Laurence Olivier famously just looked at him and went, "My dear boy, why don't you just act?" It's safe to say the two of them didn't get on very well after that.
No. I mean, whatever works, I guess. This strange veneration of celebrity actors. I mean, it's a craft as much as anything is, and there are people who are much better at it. But I mean, at the end of the day, it is playing pretend. So
Well, it is playing pretend, but I think you're perhaps being a bit unkind there. I think there are great actors, people who can take on second skins. I would say Dustin Hoffman is one of them. I would say Laurence Olivier was also fantastic, but in his own way. He wasn't one of these chameleon types, but he had a sort of a theatric grandeur that you just, you're either born with, or you just do not possess it.
No, but sure, I think we should return to the days of Shakespeare where they were treated like the vermin that they are.
Well, yes, I think one perhaps does go a bit too far in one's veneration of them, but nonetheless,
no.
Yes, I mean,
there needs to be
great actors, and there are lesser bit part chaps.
There needs to be a severe correction. I'm afraid, they could be as great as they are, but
we need to have a revolution.
They need the social standing of a maggot.
Well, I mean, in sort of the ancient days, actors and prostitutes were seen very much on the same level.
Yes, whereas now they're trying to raise prostitutes to the level of actors and singers.
I mean, I would remind you, of course, that there is a marvellous film that you, again, completely refuse to watch, which is Spartacus, in which Laurence Olivier really pulls out all the stops as Crassus.
I don't refuse to watch it. I don't watch it because it's funnier if I don't watch it.
His great opponent, of course, is Charles Laughton.
Okay.
So you really have got two just larger-than-life British actors just hating each other with abandon. And then on top of that, you throw in a bit of Peter Ustinov and Kirk Douglas, and then the least likely ancient accent of all times, that is Tony Curtis, who just had this sort of broad New Jersey accent, I think, and whatever you did, he took elocution lessons to try and get rid of it, and eventually they just gave up.
I mean, there is a charm to that. I mean, it can be jarring, but I'm sure there's a charm to it. I would watch it, Britisher, but as I say, it's more entertaining if I don't watch it.
It's the fact that I say that this is a film you ought to see that is just basically making sure that you never watch it.
I do try and get round to stuff that I haven't watched. I've never really... I don't share your passion for the... for Roman era, as it were.
I think you mistakenly believe that I regard Spartacus and Ben-Hur as great because there are Romans in them.
No, but I think you're entranced by the setting. Because
I think there are some sort of, blood and sandals films that are just absolute dirge. Putting Romans into things doesn't do it for me. But those two, I think, are clearly two of the best films ever made. And it's the subject matter. It's the sort of universality of the human condition, if you know what I mean. That's what it's more about. Spartacus is all about liberty.
Look, chat. Do you agree with Britisher on this? Are these two of the... I mean, absolutely. Remember what he said. Two of the greatest films ever made, Ben-Hur and Spartacus. Do you agree? That's what I want to know.
So now we will see just how ignorant our audience is, or how well versed, educated, and sophisticated, depending on whether they agree with me or not. But no, I would say without doubt those two. And what is so remarkable is that they were pretty much shot at the same time, and one of them was entirely a not a vanity project. That would be the wrong way of putting it. It was more a spite project. You see, Kirk Douglas wanted the lead role in Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur was the big thing that was being made.
Right.
And all of Hollywood pretty much threw its entire weight behind this thing, and Kirk Douglas wanted to be the star in it. And they told him, no, we've got this chap, Charlton Heston, he's much better suited for it. But if you want to, you can play the baddie. And Kirk Douglas, who should have accepted, because it would have been phenomenal, those two against one another. But instead, he threw a huff, went off, and and created one of the most unbelievable results of a sulk ever in film history. But he said, if you're not giving me your Roman epic, I will make my own. So this was entirely produced, in a way, as a rival to Ben-Hur.
Out of
So it was
spite.
trying to out Ben-Hur. And he later, Kirk Douglas himself, afterwards said that it was a bit insane that he went off on a bender. But the product is
Speaks for itself, right?
Yeah.
We've got some interesting replies in the comments. So you've got people like Grade, Jovanovic, who's like 100% spot on, Britisher. Crassus as a character is shattering, that sort of thing. Others who say, I agree, but only about Ben-Hur. And then you've got others which is, Spartacus was fun, but not as good as Aliens. Pretty sure.
I would... Now, as I say, when we get into Alien territory, I always felt that Alien, the original, with the Giger monster as it was intended, that was fantastic. Aliens, I know a lot of people rave about it, saying, oh, it's one of the ultimate sequels, because it was a sequel, but it did it even better. I don't really agree there. I think Alien was the far superior film to Aliens, and
yeah,
one was getting into let's throw a few more rubber monsters into it at times. I much preferred that sort of solitary terror.
Alien is very much Ridley Scott, and Aliens is very much Spielberg, right? So they're completely different genres, as it were, to my mind. It's a bit like the difference between almost Terminator 1 and 2 as well. For instance, there's a lot more. Obviously it's not the same comparison, Britisher, but it's
yeah. No, I know what you're trying to, but when it comes to Terminator 1 and 2, I think a lot of it had to do with technology. That Terminator 1 stretched what one could do at that particular time. Just the actual film technology, where one could go with it.
Right.
Terminator 2 then pretty much was the absolute cutting edge of what one could do at the point where that was made. It kind of took the technology of telling the story that bit further.
I'm getting reamed in chat, sorry, because it's James Cameron is Aliens, not Spielberg, because I fucked that up. Excuse.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I thought at the time, Spielberg, what does he talk about? But when it comes to Aliens and Alien, I really think that what one took was a sort of really strange, weird, terrifying vision, which was the first one, and then one made a sort of blockbuster action movie out of it with the second one.
I enjoyed the first. We are in agreement here, right? I think on the Alien franchise, I preferred the first one, but the second film is a different film, but almost in a different genre. In the first film, it was clever because, of course, how do you get away with the fact that in the future, we have guns. How do you have a big bad monster if you could just shoot it, right? And then they got around that with the acid blood, and then, of course, the really creepy way in which it reproduces and all that, and obviously famous practical effects as well for things like the chestburster scene.
Well, they gave the guy who designed the monster a special Oscar.
Yes.
They literally just said, okay, look, we don't have a genre of Oscar for this. We're giving you a special one.
Amazing. And then you've got Aliens.
It was yeah. No, go ahead.
Aliens, where they're just like, oh, we'll just have auto turrets then, will we? And try and go. It's not to say there wasn't tension in it, and it's a good film. It's a damn good film, but it's not.
On its own, it would be seen as, oh yeah, this is a good film. But given that it had this predecessor, that's where you sort of think, well, I don't know. I felt that the first one was much scarier. It was much, it played with your fantasy. It played with your imagination. A lot of the time in the first one, you're looking at a black screen.
I mean,
hoping to see a glimmer of something.
I mean, I think it's also that kind of quasi, like at the time, it's near futurism, right? So it was this kind of what we now call retro-futurism, where everything kind of runs off of cogs and gears, and there's a lot of metal around, and nothing's made to look pretty because it just has to be stripped down so you can go through space. Whereas now a lot of sci-fi is more like all white tunnels, right? So that kind of aesthetic as well, which kind of really lends.
Everyone lives inside the outside of an iPod. Yes.
Yes, indeed. In that sense, definitely. Aliens is worse because it spawned a franchise that refuses to die. Are you talking? I mean, I think every iteration beyond, because Alien was its own thing, Aliens was its own thing. Granted, Alien 3 never worked well. Alien 4 never worked well. Then you had this endless series of spin-offs, primarily in video games, which was very strange. And obviously we've had issues, and they've never really managed to recapture the magic of that. Although Alien Isolation came pretty close.
Well, I think one of the things that you lacked after the first one was the sensation of discovering the creature. Because, I mean, I think we can agree this monster that Giger sort of, drew somewhere out of his darkest imaginings. It's one of the scariest things that's ever been on screen. I mean, it's sort of the ultimate living, killing thing, if you know what I mean.
Well, it's one of those strange. Well, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because of course shall we say,
it appeals to our instincts.
It's
somehow.
It's not traditional in the way of a big bad. It didn't give it massive claws necessarily. Got a big tail. Obviously, you couldn't really see very much of it, but it's hulking and yet at the same time lithe. And this idea that it can crawl into places, and an enormous head as well. Very.
These fangs, and then that sort of bony tongue that comes out from the fangs with more fangs on it, and whatever. There is something in that thing that is just horrifying to us. And in the first one, you discover that thing, and just that in itself is an experience. Now, in the second one, you can't rediscover it again, because it's now already been done. It's been seen. You've seen this horror of horrors that somehow sprung from this, this man's imaginings.
Yeah.
I mean, he was supposed to. I saw a program once where they went to interview him, and it was very funny. I mean, they asked him. He was just an out-and-out eccentric, as you would imagine someone like that to be. And he, at one point, they asked him about the Oscar. And oh yeah, I've got it around here somewhere. And he went rummaging around this flat of his.
Yeah.
And they were following him with the camera. There was all sorts of stuff, cardboard boxes and stuff.
A lot of
piled on top of each other.
Yeah.
And he got to. He finally found it somewhere in the bookshelf, and he picked it up. Oh, here it is. And as he took it out, I kid you not, the nameplate fell off it. And he went, oh, that damn thing! I always keep forgetting it. They gave me some screws to fasten it on with.
But he never screwed it on.
And that said everything about him. But, I mean, he made these strange art books for years before that film. And it was almost as if he invented his own sort of genre.
Well, him and Beksinski, yeah.
but he was pretty screwed up as a kid. In that program, they sort of talked about him, and and at one point, for example, he made what do you call it? A ghost ride in his basement for the neighborhood kids. This was when he was a kid himself, something 10, 12 years old.
Yes.
And he made a ghost ride in the basement. Well, guess what? The police was called. These kids were emerging from the basement absolutely traumatized out of their wits. And there was something dark about this kid right from the beginning, and they had artwork that he had drawn as a child and whatever, and just absolutely obsessed with death and skulls and you name it. And that somehow developed into this man who could create these terrifying yet strangely beautiful creations. And of course, at some point, Hollywood came knocking and said, look, you make stuff that's so weird. How about you make us a monster? Could you do that? And yeah, he threw himself into it and created the alien. And then the second genius involved was actually the technician that made the alien work, who actually put it into practice. And he used, for example, for the sinews in the jaws and these sort of mandibles, he used condoms. So the rubber band would be like the sinew, but they would be sort of deliberately bits of translucent plastic still attached to it that would stretch with it and would give it a sort of much more vivid look.
I'm also not
so yes, those two together somehow created this hellish biological machine.
I'm also not surprised that he used condoms, given the sheer amount of sexual personae, shall we call it, that was apparent in the work. Everything.
I mean, the head. There is definitely something phallic about it. There's no doubt about it.
It's not just that. I mean, like, you've got the vaginal head face huggers. And then you've got the whole, the double mouth thing and all that jazz.
You've got the egg.
Yeah, lots of penetration going on in various
a great deal of penetration
in various guises. But as I say, the easiest comparison I can think of to Giger was because he is a weird bloke. I mean, if you've ever seen any of his documentary stuff or any interview with him, he's a very strange person. And then at the same time, you had Zlatislav Beksinski, who's going around and also drawing sometimes even more horrific things, and certainly in his own style, very rust-coloured paintings. But he was less weird. He just drew what came to mind. He wouldn't even say if it was his nightmares or not. And then he used to say, I'm not going to bother commenting on what art is. There's just no...
He just had some sort of strange direct link to the dark part of his subconscious.
This kind of surrealist, dystopian, but also organic, techno-organic, I suppose.
I mean, I must say one thing in Giger's defense, and that is his weirdness was real. Because the reason I say that is because a lot of modern art is entirely based on the persona of the artist. So the thing is the artist and not any sort of work of theirs, if you know what I mean. And therefore they indulge in being eccentrics in order to be kind of noticeable. Whereas when it came to him, he was just plain weird. He wasn't playing at it. And people were saying, people who knew him and whatever were saying, look, I'm sorry, but ever since this chap was a kid, he was never normal. So, in order to create something like the alien, you need some sort of damaged person who can create this thing. But yes, it appeals to something deep inside us. Whether it's the sort of the caveman that's afraid of the saber-toothed tiger or something like that, I don't know. But it's somehow in that primeval level. He discovered something like that.
I know you meant saber-toothed tiger, but he said...
Did I say saber-toothed?
Saber-toothed tiger, which sounds even more terrifying.
On the cyber path, we might as well have the saber-toothed tiger. Yep.
That's what you ride into battle, is it?
But in order to bring this back
like He-Man.
In order to bring this back to the origins of this, which was
Stop trying to deflect me from developing your lore in a way which is going to make you look like a badass.
The reason I think it is particularly peculiar that you have never watched Ben-Hur is because put it like this: I once watched Ben-Hur. I introduced someone to Ben-Hur and sort of said, "Well, watch this. You'll like this." And this person just happened to be quite religious. I'm not talking, absolute nutter, but I mean, I'm an atheist and whatever.
And you gave him a religious experience.
And this person watched it, and then once the film was over, turned to me and said, "How can you watch a film like this and not believe in God?" Because there is something deeply, deeply spiritual in Ben-Hur. I mean, obviously, yes, it clearly alludes to the Bible and whatever, but it's profound. I really must say it's if I were a Christian, that would really be the more than likely best ever religious film.
Was your response to this person, "Well, I have been told I am quite stubborn"? All right, we've
It's just one of those films where this person has said to me, "Well, surely if this doesn't convince you, what does?"
all right.
Yeah. So that's another reason why I just find it peculiar that Ben-Hur has so far eluded you. I mean, I don't want to go too far into this, but I mean, you have a faith, and I would say that you would marvel in that film because it tells it powerfully and without lecturing, so that even I, a atheist, can watch it and feel wow, without feeling, oh, here go the Christians again. It really has a power all of its own.
Fine, I'll watch the bloody film. All right.
It has a very, very interesting origin. I believe it was written by was it a general of the Civil War in America, and then it became a theatre play, and it was the biggest thing in America. So that the theatres outdid each other in putting on this theatre play, to the point where they actually had chariots. I mean, try and imagine a theatre play with a chariot race in it. And it was therefore sort of one of these monumental things. Have you gone and seen Ben-Hur? So of course when film came along, it was one of sort of the most bombastic things. We must make Ben-Hur, and we must make it better than any American remembers ever having seen it in the cinema. And they made it, and of course that was the silent movie. And then of course, a few decades later, you now have sound, you have colour, and they go, okay, now we need to do it again, because we need to best this. And I believe they've since, somewhere in the last 10 years or so, made another one, which I believe no one went to go and watch. Because yes, it's one of those things that you see it and you just cannot possibly imagine them ever being able to do that again. Not in scale, but also not in power. In just the same way that I would say, and this is no doubt where you disagree with me, you can't remake Superman because it's Christopher Reeve. And if you've seen Christopher Reeve as Superman, you don't want to see anybody else as Superman.
Christopher Reeve
It's just the same way that Schwarzenegger is Conan. So try to make it. I believe again they remade Conan. They just got some other hairy, muscly guy and said, "Oh well, that will be good enough." But no, it doesn't, because these figures are established in the public imagination.
Yes.
In a certain person, and when it comes to Superman, it's Christopher Reeve. You simply can't undo it. Anybody who's seen that cannot unthink him as Superman.
I mean, you might be able to get away and do it in 100 years, but that's when nobody remembers effectively, growing up with that sort of thing. I mean, 100 years is even a bit steep. But...
Who was the chap who played? I mean, no doubt the chat will know. Who was the chap who played Superman in the TV series? There wasn't there a series somewhere in the 90s or whatever.
You think
someone played Superman?
I mean, there were lots of Superman series, but I mean,
Because
are you talking something animated or something?
No.
Live action?
This was real live action, and this was quite a beefcake. They got to play Superman, obviously, and the reason I never watched the TV series. Again, as far as I'm concerned, it's Christopher Reeve, so don't bother me. But what was so funny about that was that I don't know whether they had finished filming by that time or whether the series was still going. But some chap, I don't know whether he stole a handbag or whether he was a burglar or something, but anyway, some woman ended up screaming, and that guy just happened to be around. Not in Superman outfit, but nonetheless, he was about. And his being obviously a very fit person, he managed to catch up with this guy and then sat on him until the police arrived. And you just think, that criminal must have just thought, it's just my luck, isn't it? The very day I commit a crime, the guy is around who plays Superman.
You're thinking of Dean Cain from Lois and Clark, right?
Oh well, there you go. See,
yeah.
I mean, there was a similar event once. I remember at one of the Olympic Games, where again I think it was a purse snatcher at the airport, and this chap snatched a purse just when the part of the American Olympic team was arriving, including the 100-meter sprint champion.
A very poor decision on that.
I think you can imagine the outcome. Because not only are they very fast, they also tend to be rather big lads.
Yes, quite jacked, as it were. Right. Gonna do the couple of super chats we've had come in, and then we will move from movie time to current events, as you no doubt been trying to put off for the last hour, British.
Well, there is always that. Yes. The world is miserable enough as it is. Why not talk movies? Yes.
Scowen says 56 seconds late, slightly better than last week. I have you know that we were perfectly on time, and you need to direct your.
It was it Wozc or whatever he was called. It was all his fault.
I don't know.
Scowen, you're addressing the wrong people.
Just clearly, if there's any kind of time dilation effect, it's clearly caused by this person with a name we can't remember because he's altered the timeline, so I can't remember it. That's what it is. Tim Cornish says, Mark has seen all of the garbage movies, but completely disregards British's tasteful suggestions. Tusk.
See? Tasteful suggestions.
I don't think anyone's ever described you as tasteful before, Britisher. But I've seen plenty of films. There's things I'm still... I tell you what, we'll have one more filmy TV anecdote before we go on to... I've been going back, and I appreciate that some people may consider this to be schlock, but my current sort of historical TV show to be watching at the moment is The X-Files.
Hmm.
With Gillian Anderson and
Well, there were
Dave
some good
Duchovny.
ones among them. There were some really good ones among them. There was a lot of them were just run of the mill, but once in a while they made something that you really felt, ooh, now that's a good one.
I'm watching it, and it's interesting to see the development of certain tropes, which was entrenched very much in almost all 90s kind of serialized shows and that sort of thing, and which are still used today. Particularly in crime drama and that sort of thing. It's really, really interesting. And of course, the whole monster of the week element is also fun as well, especially I mean, it's still in the first season at the moment, and of course they got a somewhat limited budget, so it's interesting to note the tricks that they use to kind of get around the fact that they can't show the monster all that much, because putting him into makeup is a bit too much time and effort and energy and money. So.
Well, I mean, very often it is the creativity that is enforced upon teams like that in order to get around their budget limitations, that then actually create something that becomes a sort of icon in its own right. I mean, in Star Trek, the only reason they had a transporter was because they couldn't afford to have them shuttled up and down from planet surfaces to the spaceship, because they couldn't afford the tricks. So therefore, we'll just have you stand there, and then we'll turn on some Christmas lights, and then you'll materialize somewhere else, and we'll just do it that way. Now, Beam Me Up, Scotty, is completely iconic. But the only reason they ever came up with that was because they needed to get round the budget restrictions.
Indeed. And it's a testament. I do worry as the spectacle has improved, but the storytelling hasn't necessarily.
Well, the storytelling has got poorer. I'm sorry.
in some cases, although that usually, if it's going to do well, and if the story is well written, it comes because it's based on something else. But then the TV executives get it into their mind that they want more spectacle than was written into the story, or they run out of material. I mean, I wasn't the greatest fan of Game of Thrones, but I wasn't. I watched the first 4 seasons, I think, before it kind of started.
I never watched any of it.
That's fine, but
it never even tickled me.
That's fine, but it has to be said, it was well written, and then they reached the end of their. He hasn't finished writing it yet, so they reached the end of that and then kind of went in their own direction. Yeah, and of course, it was just hideous and was worse, and now nobody watches it, and everybody hates
the soul of it was actually in the writing by the actual original author.
Indeed.
And as long as they could sort of mine that material, they were fine. The moment they had to go beyond that, suddenly things started falling apart. Yeah, no, that's we've seen that time and again, haven't we?
Well, it's funny, like crime dramas as well and that sort of thing. They do quite well. I enjoyed Castle with was it Nathan Fillion and Stana Katic, but it came up with some interesting stuff. But at the end of the day, the formula is almost always the same with these things. So they found the winning formula. And
talking of TV programs, have you had the joy? And I have to say, it is
probably not
unmitigated joy. The utter joy of seeing Clarkson's Farm.
Yes, I watched all of it twice.
That was wonderful. I must admit, I really, really enjoyed that, because at one moment it is Clarkson just being Clarkson. But at the next moment, Clarkson was the audience.
You can.
He stood in as us being completely clueless regarding anything to do with agriculture. Because when he was standing there at that auction of the agricultural machinery, and he was looking at these things going, what does that do? What on earth is this? And you just sat there in front of the telly going, yeah, I have no idea. I should know, because this stuff feeds me, but I have absolutely no idea what this is. And I must say, yes, it was. As I say, it had that double thing. The one thing everybody enjoys seeing Clarkson,
Well,
but the other one was really that you felt you were seeing stuff you really ought to know about.
Well, the farming and the agricultural industry, the farmers have said, this is obviously, this show has done more for people's understanding of what farmers actually go through in this country than years and years of tweets by the Farmers Union or whatever.
National Farmers Union.
But
yes.
the curious thing with it, I compare it to, is he was on a very tight time schedule, because farmers are, and he had to get things done, and so it was so much. It's probably, there is still scripting in it. There's moments. There's moments like he's going there and he's going, oh, I think I've put my arm up its anus, with the lambing and stuff, and you go, okay, you're gonna have to take that with it. It's Clarkson, but I did like some of the lines, like when he's commenting unscripted on what Amazon have asked of him, for instance, about they want him to put diversity in it, and
oh yes, they want more diversity,
and
he's found they've really hit the button here.
Yes, with the most diverse cast of 65-year-old men, white men in Britain, and but yes, you're right. There's this whole sense of genuine exploration with it, and one of the things I'll compare it to, because it came out, I think, the same week, and because it's the same, it's connected tangentially, is Richard Hammond's new show, which...
Oh, I am not aware of that.
Right, so
what has Richard Hammond been up to?
So he did, it was called, this is how memorable it was. Richard Hammond's, what is this? The Great Escapists. There you go. And it's this thing with him and a comedian, a former host of American Mythbusters,
okay.
But not one of the original guys, and they are supposedly stuck on a desert island and have to build contraptions in order to kind of find a way home. Yeah. But it is the most scripted thing I have ever... they're constantly maintaining this narrative that they went on a fishing trip and they've actually been marooned.
Well,
none of the builds happen on screen. None of the challenges make any sense. It is all said in terrible acting voice. And then they have these weird segments where it cuts to the future, where they're being interviewed by the CIA or something about what happened. And again, it's just awful. It is the worst thing he has ever produced, and it's the most... it had potential. The premise had potential. But because of the way it was done, just horrific. Whereas I think Clarkson's at that stage where he just doesn't care, and he wanted to make his show.
The thing I would point to is it's more that Clarkson's Farm was more than likely done with Clarkson's producer. You see, when Clarkson and the other two left the BBC, they were not the only ones.
No, of course not.
The main producer of Top Gear left with them. So the Grand Tour was produced by that producer.
By Mr. Willman?
Well, there you go, Mr. Willman. I didn't know that. I would assume that it was Mr. Willman that was more than likely involved with Clarkson's Farm.
I don't know about that.
I have no idea.
What I do think is that Clarkson... I mean, there's a difference between making a show and because the Grand Tour was on hold, right? And and Amazon go, we've got these people. If we pay them to do stuff, they're one of our biggest assets. We paid a lot for them. And they bring in a lot of revenue. What can we do with these people? And Clarkson had, he said, I'm going to go off and I'm going to do my farm, and you can film that if you like. And then they developed that kind of organic idea into the idea of a show. But of course, at the heart of it, it still has to be what he wanted to do with it, as opposed to slamming two presenters, let's call them that, together and in a fictional premise, and then crafting a show out of that. I mean, with for lack of a better... I mean, I don't know how to describe it other than it's utter schlock, right? So, I don't know. Okay, right. I said we'd stop talking about TV, but we appear to have gone on for another 15
I
minutes.
managed to drag you back in by diverting to Clarkson territory and his Lambo. Yes, and anybody who's seen the series will know what we mean with Clarkson's Lamborghini. Moving on.
Love it. Right, so we have we obviously have had several things which have come out this week. Most important, I suppose, is or most relevant at the moment, excuse the noise, is Matt Hancock being caught with his hand on his cock, as it were.
Well, not so much on that part of his anatomy. It was more someone else's anatomy.
Okay, so he should have kept his hand on his cock. That's what you should say.
I mean, I refer to it as a half flashman. This is due to the fact that I didn't know where his other hand was. But
Go on.
Anybody who has read the Flashman novels will know what that means. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I would love to know, as sort of an addendum to the whole story, I would love to know how the Sun got hold of that security camera footage. Because always remembering that, a certain Mr. Dominic Cummings hated Matt Hancock and had been in government and more than likely still had some connections.
I think
you can't help but feel that might have been the way. But this is not in any way to defend Matt Hancock. I mean, he was toast. He was absolute toast the moment that story came out. How the Prime Minister...
Yes, this is the biggest thing. He should have been fired, right? Because that would have... he was going to go anyway. He was either going to resign, he was going to be fired, and if he was going to weather it, you know that it would have dominated discourse for an ungodly amount of time, and that would only have been allowed to happen if the... how should I put it? If there was something the government didn't want talked about, right? More.
Yeah.
So he should have fired him because it would have made the Tories look strong, come down harsh on this sort of thing. But of course, at the Boris Johnson, the man who, of course, famously is now with his mistress, is the one who is supportive. Oh, I'm deeply saddened that Matt Hancock has resigned and that sort of thing. Like, come on.
I put it like this in the week that was. I sort of said, look, there are sort of various sort of possibilities. One of them is that Boris may have completely misinterpreted this. Because some of the Tories made a lot of noise about the adultery side of things, he may have got the wrong end of the stick, thinking, oh, well, I can't really appear too sanctimonious here by, because, I mean, as you say, I mean, his own private life is, well, let's put it colourful,
Yes, but, like, I mean,
so,
you don't... Yes.
But in the end, I think when the public is concerned particularly, nobody gives two hoots about the adultery aspect. Everybody's looking at it going, hang on a moment, this is the health secretary.
You'd be surprised.
Who is issuing edicts regarding social distancing.
Yeah, flagrantly breaking his own rules.
That very moment, at the very, as that is going on, here he is, not just within, too close a distance with someone from a different household, but I mean, exchanging bodily fluids, for Christ's sake.
Yes, this is at a time when you have to remember as well that it was made illegal to have sex with your partner if you were, with your boyfriend or girlfriend
in different
or spouse,
households, yes.
If you were in a different household. This has also come not too far after the G7, where an inordinate amount of photos came out of them very much enjoying themselves, obeying no social distancing rules and having a bit of a party and getting wasted. It was absolutely just the peak hypocrisy, right? And the optics on it were awful. Then it comes out the health secretary, the man who's confined us all to our homes. We're all in it together. Thank you very much. I know this is hard, but we need to suffer through. Well, actually, he's not suffering through at all. In fact, he's destroying his relationship with his wife and children in order to get some off with this tart in the office, who also is destroying her own relationship, as I understand it.
She's also married, yes.
Yeah. All very surreal. Interesting that there's not massive backlash to her either.
I can only imagine that, as I say, either it's a case of somehow wires being crossed as to what was going on, or it was, hang on a moment, how can I fire him if I didn't fire Dominic Cummings?
Dominic Cummings leaving was made into a spectacle anyway. I mean, giving him his box of things.
I'm talking about his famous drive to Durham and then afterwards his drive to Barnard Castle.
Yes.
That did not cause him to be fired.
Yes.
So, dear Dominic.
Yeah, but that was bad optics as well.
So how could I then fire Matt? So that's what I'm thinking might be going on in Boris's head, if you know what I mean.
It might be going on.
Either he's wondering, can I fire Matt Hancock if I didn't fire Dominic Cummings over a COVID faux pas, if you know what I mean. At the same time, you then, as I say, you've got the question of, was he getting the wrong end of the stick and thinking this was about the morality aspect rather than the COVID aspect? And the third option that I would put in there is, was he trying to let Hancock do the honourable thing? As in, look, if I let him see the folly of this and resign, he may have a way back in afterwards. If he stubbornly refuses to go over something as calamitous as this, and I have to publicly fire him, it may be much harder for him to return into sort of ministerial politics after a sort of, hiatus of a year or two.
Well, of course, I mean, even then, he's only resigned from his position as health minister, right? He still maintains all of the other benefits.
They all always do that. Yes, I resign my immediately most prominent position, but I hold on to everything else. And I have now publicly fallen on my sword by keeping all my other positions of privilege. Yes, no, that's what politicians do as a matter of course.
I do hate these people, Britisher. Deeply, deeply, madly.
The last time I think anybody did anything that resembled principle was when David Davis resigned his parliamentary seat and then stood again, saying, if you vote for me, you know what you're voting for. Does this ring any bell?
Yeah.
He was a...
Yeah, I know who David Davis
Shadow
is.
Home Secretary or something. And
he do something with Europe as well. Yeah.
He fell out. He fell out spectacularly with Dave Cameron. Yes, I believe for a while he was the minister in charge of negotiating with Europe, and Theresa May was making life completely impossible for him.
Yes.
But yes, at one point, because he very much disagreed with some of the sort of surveillance state being built up, he stepped down as MP, but then stood again. So he basically said, well, you can still vote for me, but I want to give you the opportunity to basically vote for someone else if this is not the way you want me to go. But this is the way I will go because I thoroughly disagree with this. And it's rare that you would get a politician ever do such a thing. And David Davis earned a lot of respect of mine at that moment. Because yes, he risked his career, even though it was fairly clear he would more than likely get elected again. But it could have all gone totally wrong. And he nonetheless did it. And you don't see politicians do a lot of that these days.
Yes. In fact, I would strongly suggest that many of our politicians should be made forcibly to do such a thing on a regular basis. But with regards to Hancock, you have to ask yourself as well, is about the timing of this. Is we're coming up now to the end of so-called end of COVID restrictions, 19th of July and all that stuff. Although we have had a story today from Andrew Marr on catching COVID after being double vaccinated, and I caught the Delta variant and it was awful. I thought I had a summer cold after all, and then ended up in this awful state where I couldn't smell anything, and I kept on having to sleep, and I was worrying about long COVID and everything like that. And he's just going, oh, it's all very infectious. And I don't trust the fact that if this noise is starting now, 3 weeks before we're set to open up again, after it has been confirmed, quote unquote, that the vaccines are effective against the Delta variant to a large extent. And I don't know what we're going to. I don't want to go back into lockdown for another month, Patricia. That's the thing which is really irking me. I want to be able to.
Well, I think that is precisely the main worry of the government, and I think this is why the extension happened, because I think they simply felt that the worst thing that could possibly happen was that you would ease up, and then oh no, it's not turning out quite as we want. Let's tighten everything back up again, but now tighten it up even more because we need to get it back down again, and therefore I think they just basically looked at it and said, okay, look, let's sleep on it in another month, and go with it then.
I fear that they'll do that again. I fear that they will, be pearl clutching, purse grabbing, as it were.
I don't know. I think that the vaccines are going in and whatever. I think that the pressure to release is getting bigger and bigger.
And that's what Matt Hancock said. Yes.
With these various events, because they're now having various events around the country that they're sort of running as test events. And incidentally, the Euro finals at Wembley are also deemed one of those test events. So if they're having these test events, and then there are no significant, sort of consequences from that, I don't really see how they could argue for a further extension. Something would have to happen. I mean, there's that famous sentence, isn't it? Famous line: "Events, dear boy, events." But yeah, so if some event suddenly disrupts this whole thing, then I could see it sort of swerving off course. But I don't think, without anything new, anything significant added into this, I can't see them suddenly going, no, we have to continue. I mean, the reason why they delayed was because they said, okay, look, we've got this new wave coming. We've also got this variant coming, and it's got into Britain because of the close links with India. So we need to keep an eye on this, and if we now open up, it might suddenly bite us. But I can't see anything new having popped up which would basically provide fodder for that, if you know what I mean. So yes, you can never be certain, but my view is we're more than likely, yes, we're going to go through to the 19th, and then it's going to open up again.
I bloody well hope
I doubt
so.
it will open up totally, no restriction on anything anymore.
I mean, even if they did open with no restriction, the amount of paranoia in the general public is just at an extent where it wouldn't be open as usual, and there would probably still be a lot of businesses abiding by a lot of strange guidelines which no longer apply and make no sense. Especially things like restricting the number of people outside your venue. Very strange. But what do we make of Sajid Javid taking over from Hancock as the health secretary? Do you think he has the experience that he has the knowledge and the forethought and the ability to deal with this.
As a minister, he has experience insofar that he's run the Home Office and he's run the Chancellery. So he is an old pair of hands as far as a senior minister is concerned. He has run big departments before. Whether he has any knowledge of health is another matter, but I think that's why they've chosen him, because they feel here is a guy who's already run 2 big departments and presently hasn't got a position. I mean, what was it? Wasn't it Ken Clarke who had pretty much run every major department in government at one point, except being Prime Minister?
Little before my time, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think he pretty much holds the record in that. I think he pretty much was everything at some point. But yes, I mean, this is now his third senior position. So he's already held 2. So given that a lot of this in with fighting COVID is about logistics, having a guy who isn't really, he won't walk into the office and go, "Oh my God, can I handle this?" is maybe a bonus, if you know what I mean.
I tell you what, I have enjoyed about this general trend and the whole Hancock situation, actually, is a couple of days ago, Regent Street, which is the namesake of this particular episode of Fake Accents, was filled to the brim with about, I think it was about 35,000 ravers, is how the BBC described them. And they were a lot of basic. I don't think it was intended to be like a mainstream. There was a protest, an anti-lockdown protest, but then they've added the rave element because there are people who are saying they want their right to party back, basically. There was an enormous truck with something like 10 JBL big speakers on it, blaring stuff out, and people were.
You always wonder how much help rather than a hindrance people like that are.
Well, do you know what? They won't report, and they haven't reported on anti-lockdown protests before, and now they're reporting on it. They're reporting on it as a mass illegal gathering of ravers, but there are a lot of people there with placards which are then getting exposure. And I think it's disingenuous, as I say. I understand why, in some ways, they've done it, right? If it was a lethal pandemic and that sort of thing, what you would want to do in that situation is minimise the amount of platforming of dissent, as it were. But it's not accurate. In somewhere like the BBC, which should be aiming for impartial and, as we know, isn't, sort of reporting, should have been covering these events, in the national interest, right? It's the national interest to know that, there isn't necessarily, 75% or whatever approval for these things. And if there is, you still need to be able to understand where the complaints of those who are protesting it are coming from. Otherwise they grow, and then you end up with situations like this where you have to kind of go to more and more absurd tactics in order to.
Well, it's that famous thing that the opposition needs to be represented. I mean, as such, I think that it has got very strong approval. But nonetheless, yes, this isn't really a reason to pretend that the other side doesn't exist. It's a bit like having a general election and then just not having Prime Minister's question time and not asking the leader of the opposition any questions because, the people voted for the other one. You still need to have that other perspective represented. Yes.
I certainly think so. And more power to them. The police were there, obviously in full riot gear for these dangerous extremists. Again, even though...
well, you see, I mean, that's where the ravers were just idiots, weren't they? Because there would have been a way to get the police to join in.
Yes, all they needed to do was chant Black Lives Matter.
Well, yeah, but that only works so far. But given the time of year, if they would have painted their faces in rainbow colours and waved rainbow flags, then they would have been dancing in the street with the police.
Well, there's that. Or if I may make an incredibly obscure reference, they could have played the song Cuban Pete which would, of course, have
Okay, that is sufficiently obscure for me to not know what you're talking about.
which would have forced everybody to join in an enormous conga line and dance around, especially the police. That is a reference to Jim Carrey in The Mask.
Okay, yes, I am proud of you. Again, another masterpiece on celluloid that both of us have seen. Yes.
And he has. Do you know when they were? We're back on films again, chaps. When they were running the test audiences for that, the studio had said, "What on earth is this Cuban Pete song?" If you haven't seen it, look it up on YouTube. It's a hilarious scene and very surreal, but great fun. And they basically ran this past the test audiences, and the studio were like, "Right, we want you to take out this scene." And they had to show that the test audiences said it was their favourite part of the film, in order to, and finally managed to wrestle it into. So it's almost not there, and it's one of the great scenes in the film. With I don't even think Cameron Diaz is in it, because he dances with that police woman. But yes, anyway, and prostitutes for some reason. It's all very strange. But it's a fun scene anyway. Right. In terms of,
I don't recollect that much. I don't recollect that much of The Mask, I'm afraid, to be able to join in the appreciation for Cuban Pete. I think I know which get-up we're talking about, but that's just about it.
I'm going to.
I did see the film a long time ago, but it did not make as quite a big an impression on me, I think, than it did on you.
I don't know. It wasn't necessarily an impression, but my grandparents had it on DVD, right? So I used to watch it quite a lot as a child. But let's see if I can take.
So was this the DVD your grandparents had in order to keep young, not so obvious, quiet and entertained?
Essentially. that and of all the Jurassic Parks, Jurassic Park 3, which is the worst one. So, I mean, apart from some of the new reboots, this is the if you're watching the stream right now, this is the Cuban Pete scene. I'm not got audio on it because I don't want to get copyright struck or anything like that. But you need to go and look this up. It's very surreal. Anyway, there we go. Right. With that, I think it is. It's probably about time to end. I'm going to release the winner of the Civ 6 giveaway in the top comment. But please like the stream, subscribe, and that sort of thing. Do have a couple of super chats actually, which we should go through before the end. So that crime guy says, Britisher, what do you know about George Reeves?
George Reeves? Off the top of my head, nothing. It doesn't ring a bell.
He is a chap who originally played Superman on TV, apparently, but died in mysterious circumstances. So I know nothing about him myself beyond that, but there you go.
I just Googled him. I recognise the picture of him, but that's about as much that I can say. I've never seen the TV series or anything.
And there we go. Ian Inkster says, don't be too hard on the aide, this being the Hancock story. She is just a humble vessel into which the minister has been pouring the fruits of his deliberations.
Well, there is that. But talking of pouring and talking of her, surely she should be, her name, her family in that regard, should start a Italian brand of Coca-Cola, sort of own brand Coke, because she's called Cola d'Angelo. So, Cola d'Angelo of the Angel. I'm sorry, how is this missed?
As someone who works in somewhat of a marketing space, I'm glad that you don't.
You evil, villainous. Snake
in the grass? Is that what you were going to say, Richard? I don't know. On that note, it is time to end. Thank you so much for everyone for watching. Thank you ever so much to the Britisher for coming back to us. We'll try and get some additional guests on, but I wanted this week to be kind of just you and me, bit of a return to form and that sort of thing.
It was an honour and a privilege, and I got to lecture you on Spartacus and Ben-Hur again.
I know, which is your favourite activity.
Brings meaning to my life.
Your absolute favourite activity, I know. So, yes, absolute pleasure.
You do realise that once you've watched those 2 films, I will be badgering you about 2 others.
Well, we'll have nothing more to talk about because I'll simply watch every film in existence and then I'll be badgering you. So there you go. Goodbye, everybody. Take care. Have a great week.
Doodle pip.